The snow outside the Hargrove Gallery was doing what Canadian snow does in February, falling sideways, indifferent to the opening night happening inside, indifferent to the 47 guests, clutching champagne flutes and pretending to understand the abstract installation in the East Wing. Cecelia Drummond saw the problem before she crossed the threshold. The lighting rig above the entrance was angled 3 degrees too steep. It turned the gallery's signature sandstone wall from warm amber to the color of old teeth, and it bathed the sculptor's centerpiece, a 7-foot bronze commission that had taken 14 months to cast, in a shadow that made it look like a fire hazard rather than a triumph. She didn't run. She never ran in the gallery. She walked with the specific purpose of someone who has already decided what needs to happen, and is simply closing the distance between herself and the solution. "Dimitri," she said to the lighting technician near the panel box by the coat check. "Third fixture from the left on the overhead rig. Move it 12 degrees clockwise. Don't ask me why. Just do it before the Alderton party arrives." Dimitri opened his mouth. 12 degrees, she said pleasantly, and she kept walking. That was how Cecelia Drummond operated. Quietly, precisely, without the performance that most people confused with authority. She was the senior exhibitions coordinator at Hargrove Gallery in Vancouver, had been for 3 years, and before that had spent 2 years in the same building learning every circuit, every sightline, every acoustical quirk of the place, the way some people learn a language they intend to speak for the rest of their lives. She was 31 years old, and she was very good at her job, and she had learned to say so in her head because saying it out loud in certain rooms had a way of making people uncomfortable. She retrieved a cup of tea from the catering table, checked the floral arrangements against the layout she'd submitted 6 weeks ago, made a small note about the placement of a pedestal near the north window, and was in the middle of rereading the event brief on her tablet when she heard the voice behind her. The Alderton installation would read better if you rotated the viewing path. It was a calm voice, not opinionated, not correcting. It was the kind of voice that states something the way you'd state the temperature, as a fact in the world available to anyone who wanted it. Cecelia turned. The man standing behind her was somewhere in his early 40s, wearing a coat he hadn't bothered to check, holding a program he hadn't opened. He was looking at the bronze sculpture the way she'd seen architects look at buildings they hadn't designed but wished they had. "Rotated how?" she asked. He gestured with the hand holding the program, not pointing, tracing. If the entry path came in from the east side instead of north, the first thing a guest sees is the negative space in the casting rather than the figure itself. It changes the entire emotional register. You'd feel the absence before you understood the presence. Cecelia looked at the sculpture. She looked at the north entrance. She looked back at him. "That would require moving 4 linear feet of partition wall," she said. "I know. The opening is in 40 minutes. I know that too." She studied him for 2 seconds. He wasn't being difficult. He wasn't trying to impress her. He had the expression of someone who had already fully processed the idea and was now simply waiting to see whether she found it useful or not. There was a particular kind of patience in it that she recognized from very few people she'd met. "What's your name?" she asked. "Bennett Holt," he said. "I'm here to meet the gallery director. He's on the 2nd floor. I thought so." Bennett Holt didn't move right away. He looked at the sculpture for another moment, then at the north partition, then at her. "I'm sorry, I don't know your name." "Cecelia Drummond. I coordinated the exhibition." He nodded, not in the way people nod when they're not listening, in the way someone confirms something they suspected. "The lighting adjustment on the sandstone wall. That was you. It was off by about 12 degrees, he said. She looked at him for a second longer. "Enjoy the opening, Mr. Holt." She walked away. And she spent the next 40 minutes making sure the Alderton party had a flawless arrival. The caterers stayed out of the sightlines, and the audio for the sculptor's recorded statement played at the correct volume, while the back of her mind returned, twice, to the idea of the east side entry path. She didn't act on it. But she thought about it, and that was already something. The second time she crossed paths with Bennett Holt was not at the gallery. It was at a city planning consultation on East Hastings, 6 days later, in a room that smelled of stale coffee and old carpet and the specific optimism of people who still believed bureaucratic processes could be hurried. Cecelia was there representing the gallery's interest in the proposed mixed-use development adjacent to their loading dock. She had a binder. She had 3 annotated diagrams. She was prepared. Bennett Holt was there because, as she learned 30 minutes into the session when the facilitator introduced the project's lead architect, the proposed development was his. She recognized him immediately. He hadn't seen her yet. He was talking to a city official on the far side of the room, holding a rolled drawing the way people hold something they've handled. So often it's become an extension of their hand. When the formal consultation began and she stood to raise the gallery's concern about loading access and the proposed side setback, he looked up from his drawings and his expression shifted, not into surprise exactly, but into the particular alertness of someone who has just recalibrated something. Mr. Drummond, the facilitator said, checking the sign-in sheet. The current design, Cecelia said without preamble, places a structural column at a position that would require our loading dock operations to route delivery vehicles an additional 40 meters east during construction. That's 14 months of operational disruption we haven't been consulted on. A man in a gray suit 2 chairs down from the architect. Bennett's project manager, she guessed, from the way he reflexively reached for his own binder, said, "The setback was approved at the last review cycle." "Approved by whom?" Cecelia asked. "The committee, the Hargrove Gallery, has direct stakeholder status in this corridor," she said, still pleasant. "We should have been at the last review cycle." A silence settled over the room, not hostile. More like the silence when someone states a fact loudly enough that the room has to decide whether to acknowledge it. Bennett Holt set down his drawing. "She's right," he said. "We missed the stakeholder notification. That's on our office." He looked at the project manager. "We need to put a consultation meeting on the books before end of month." He looked at Cecelia. "Would 2 weeks work for your schedule?" She didn't look away. "1 week. We have a board presentation at the end of the month, and I'd like to have something concrete before then." Bennett Holt considered that for about 3 seconds. 1 week, he agreed. The facilitator continued. Cecelia wrote down the date, and she did not look at the architect again, though she was aware in the specific way of a person at a well-lit desk near a window that someone across the room had not stopped looking at her. The meeting at the architecture office was on a Tuesday. The office was on the 7th floor of a converted warehouse in Gastown, with exposed beams, industrial windows looking out over the inlet, and the kind of deliberate disorder that actually took effort to maintain. Stacks of models, pinned drawings, a coffee machine that appeared to be holding the operation together through sheer force of caffeine. Cecelia arrived 6 minutes early. She was shown to a boardroom where Bennett Holt was already seated with 2 associates, and a set of drawings she could see from across the table were the revised site plans. He stood when she walked in, not performatively, just stood. "Thank you for coming," he said. "Thank you for moving quickly," she said. They sat. The associates, a woman named Priya who handled structural coordination, and a younger man named Tobias who never stopped drawing small notations in the margin of his notepad, took her through the proposed adjustment. Moving the column 1.8 meters east, a revised construction staging plan, a loading access easement during the Phase 2 period. Cecelia went through it carefully. She asked 4 questions, each precise, each aimed at a different point of potential failure. Priya answered 3 of them well. The 4th, about drainage impact on the gallery's heritage foundation, she deferred to Bennett. He explained the engineering solution without oversimplifying it and without performing expertise. He spoke like someone who had thought about a problem from enough angles that he'd arrived at genuine comfort with the answer rather than rehearsed confidence. "I'll need to take this back to our facilities manager," Cecelia said when he'd finished. "But provisionally this addresses our concerns?" "Provisionally," he repeated. "I don't commit on behalf of the gallery without running it past the relevant people." "That's reasonable," he said, without any of the faint impatience she'd learned to expect when people processed her caution as obstruction. She closed her folder. She picked up her coat from the chair beside her. "Can I ask you something?" he said. She paused. "The east side entry path, at the opening. Did you think about it afterward?" Cecelia looked at him for a moment. "I thought about it twice," she said, "during the event. I didn't act on it because the partition wall would have taken 4 people and 20 minutes we didn't have. But you thought it would have worked." "I thought it would have changed something," she said. "Whether that's the same as working depends on what you think the exhibition was trying to do." Bennett Holt sat with that. What was it trying to do? "Make people feel small in a particular way that felt like a gift rather than an insult," she said. "The sculptor spent 14 months on a figure that's mostly hollow. She wanted people to understand that the hollow part was the point." He was quiet for a moment. "The east entry would have done that." "Yes," Cecelia said, "it would have." She put her coat on and left. And she noticed, at the door, that neither of the associates had said anything during that last exchange. The room had just let it happen. That was the beginning of something she didn't name for another 3 weeks. The things she didn't name had the following characteristics. She remembered what Bennett Holt said in rooms. She found herself thinking of the inlet view from his boardroom when she was reviewing sightlines in the gallery. And she had explained the Alderton sculpture's intention to him in more detail than she'd explained it to anyone, including the sculptor herself. Sophie noticed, 4 days later, in the way that her closest friend at the gallery noticed everything. With the precision of someone who had been paying attention since the beginning and was simply waiting for the right moment to mention it. "You talked about the gas-down meeting for 23 minutes, Sophie said, refilling her tea. "There was a lot to cover." "You talked about the column relocation for 3 of those minutes," Sophie said pleasantly. "The other 20 were about the man. I talked about the architectural approach." "Cecelia." Sophie set down the pot. "It's me." Cecelia looked at her tea. "He's interesting," she said finally, in the tone of someone making a concession they've decided is technically accurate and no more. "He's also the lead architect on a project adjacent to our building," Sophie said, "which is either a complication or a very good story." "It's a professional relationship," Cecelia said. Sophie said nothing. She had a very effective silence. 2 days after that conversation, Cecelia received an email from Bennett Holt's office with the revised site plan attached and a single line beneath the file. "The drainage solution is solid, but if you want to walk the site before sign-off, the offer stands." BH. She looked at that line for longer than was necessary. She replied, "Thursday at noon, I'll meet you there." The site was an emptied lot on East Hastings that had once been a parking structure and currently existed in that particular state of urban potential. Chain-link fence, cleared ground, a few remaining support columns standing like monument to whatever had been there before. The February cold had a quality she associated with Vancouver waterfront specifically. Not the hard cold of the interior, but the wet gray cold that gets into fabric and stays. Bennett Holt was already there. He was wearing a site jacket over a dark sweater and holding 2 coffees, one of which he extended to her without asking whether she wanted it, which she noticed was something he'd done before at the boardroom meeting, and which she filed away as a habit of his rather than a calculation. "Thanks," she said, taking it. "The drainage runs along here." He walked her along the western edge of the cleared lot. "We're tying into the existing municipal line, which means the gallery's foundation impact is actually lower than the original design." She followed. She asked 2 questions. He answered them without hesitation, and on the third point about groundwater absorption rates near the property line, he said, "I'm not certain. I'll have the civil engineer send you the study." "Thank you," she said. They stood at the far end of the lot, where you could see through the cleared line of sight to the inlet below. The water was silver and flat. A freighter sat in the distance going nowhere obvious. "Why architecture?" she said. "Not why did you become an architect, just why." He considered it seriously. "There's a specific problem I keep trying to solve," he said. "How to make a person feel correctly located, not comfortable necessarily. Just where they are. I think most people go through life slightly unsure of where they are in space. Good architecture corrects for that." Cecelia looked at the water. "The Alderton sculpture does the same thing," she said. "That's what the hollow was for, to put you in relationship to the space around you rather than the object in front of you." Bennett looked at her. "You think like an architect." "I think like someone who has spent 3 years figuring out how to put things in rooms so that people feel things they wouldn't have felt otherwise. That is architecture," he said. She turned her head slightly. "Don't flatter me. It's not flattery," he said. "It's a classification." She almost smiled. She turned back to the water. The freighter had moved marginally eastward. His phone buzzed. He glanced at it, didn't answer. It buzzed again. He glanced again, and she saw briefly the name on the screen, Catherine Holt. He put the phone in his jacket pocket with the careful movement of someone managing something they don't want to manage right now. "You should probably take that," she said. "It can wait, Bennett." He looked at her. Something in his face changed. Not the way guilt looks. More like the look of someone who has just realized they're standing in 2 conversations at once and hasn't decided which one to finish first. "It's my sister," he said. "She calls at inconvenient times, habitually. Then she knows about your schedule," Cecelia said. "She knows about my schedule and finds it largely irrelevant," he said. "That's the Catherine approach." Cecelia looked at the water. "Go ahead." He stepped back 10 feet and answered it. She could hear the tone of his side of the conversation, brief, affectionate, a little exasperated in the specific way of siblings who have known each other long enough that the exasperation has become its own form of warmth. She finished her coffee. She looked at the cleared lot. She thought about what he'd said, feeling correctly located. She hadn't heard it put that way before, but she understood exactly what he meant, and that was the thing she kept returning to. He came back. "Sorry, don't be. She's family." He looked at her for a moment. "She said something about this project at dinner last week that was smarter than anything my team said in 3 meetings. That's also the Catherine approach." "What did she say?" "That I'm building for the future of the block without asking anyone who currently lives on the block what the block means to them." He paused. "She's right, we're behind on the community consultation component." Cecelia looked at the lot. "The gallery could host it," she said, before she'd fully decided to say it. "We have the space. We have a community relationship, and frankly, a consultation hosted at a community institution lands differently than one in a corporate office." Bennett was quiet for 2 seconds. "That's practical," she said. "Not generous. It's in the gallery's interest to have the project proceed well." "Right," he said. He was looking at her with that expression she'd catalogued twice now, the one where he was paying actual attention. "I'll put together a proposal," she said. "Send it to your office by Friday, Cecelia," he said. She looked at him. "Thank you." "It's practical," she said again. And she walked back toward the chain-link gate, which was true, and was also not the entire truth, and she was aware of both things at once. The proposal went to his office on Friday. The community consultation was scheduled for 3 weeks later. Between those 2 events, something happened that changed the shape of everything. She found out from Sophie, who had found out from the facilities manager, who had heard it from someone on the board, which was exactly the wrong sequence for news of that kind to travel. The board of Hargrove Gallery was in discussion with a development group, not Bennett's firm. A different group, one with a proposal to purchase the east wing of the gallery property as part of a hotel expansion. The discussion had been happening for 2 months. It had not been shared with senior staff. And the lead coordinator of what would become the new curatorial direction, if the sale went through and the gallery restructured, was a name Cecelia didn't know. Someone brought in from Toronto. Someone who had already been meeting with the director. She found this out on a Wednesday afternoon. She stood in the back corridor of the gallery with Sophie, who was holding her tea and watching her face the way you watch a surface that might crack. "How long has this been happening?" Cecelia asked. 2 months, maybe more, Sophie said. "I don't know everything. I only know that Patricia has been in late-door meetings every Thursday for 6 weeks. Patricia Svensson was the gallery's executive director. Cecelia had worked under her for 3 years. She had submitted 17 exhibition proposals in that time, all approved. She had managed 9 major openings. She had never been told about a structural review of the gallery's physical footprint. She spent the evening thinking about whether to act or wait. She waited. She waited because she'd learned, over time, that the difference between reacting and responding was usually about 4 hours. Reacting got you into rooms where you said things that were accurate but not strategic. Responding got you into rooms where you said things that were both. By Thursday morning, she had her response. She requested a meeting with Patricia Svensson. The director's assistant, clearly instructed to manage her calendar carefully that week, said Patricia was unavailable until the following Wednesday. "Wednesday is fine," Cecelia said. "Please let her know I'm requesting the meeting in my capacity as Senior Exhibitions Coordinator, and that the subject is the East Wing development proposal." She said this pleasantly. She said this in the hallway where 2 colleagues could hear her. The meeting moved to Friday morning. Patricia Svensson's office looked out over the gallery's interior atrium. She was a capable director, efficient and well-connected, who had built the gallery's profile over 9 years through a combination of genuine taste and political acuity. She was also, Cecelia had observed, a person who sometimes confused the two. "You wanted to discuss the East Wing," Patricia said. "I wanted to understand the timeline," Cecelia said. "Because as the coordinator responsible for exhibitions planning through the next fiscal year, I've been working on a multi-year programming proposal that's premised on our current footprint. If the footprint is changing, I need to know. Nothing is finalized. I know that. I'm not asking about finalized decisions. I'm asking about the scope of the discussion so I can plan accordingly." Cecelia kept her folder closed on her lap. "I've submitted 14 months of forward planning. If any of it is premised on space we may not have, I'd like the opportunity to revise it before it goes to the board." Patricia looked at her carefully. Cecelia held her gaze without aggression and without submission. The specific look of someone stating a professional need and waiting for a professional answer. "The East Wing conversation is exploratory," Patricia said at last. "There are no firm proposals. There is interest from a development group. Is there a timeline for a decision?" "End of Q2. That's 4 months," Cecelia said. "Yes, all right. I'd like to be kept informed of substantive developments that affect programming. Not every meeting, just anything that changes the parameters I'm working within." Patricia sat with that for a moment. "That's a reasonable ask." "Thank you," Cecelia said, and she stood up because she had what she came for, and she had learned that leaving promptly after getting what you came for was a skill people underestimated. She was in the elevator when Sophie texted, "How did it go?" Cecelia replied, "Reasonable." Sophie replied, "Is that good or bad?" Cecelia, "It means she wasn't prepared for direct, which means the conversation she'd been having before me wasn't direct, which tells me something." Sophie, "What does it tell you?" Cecelia stood at the elevator door. She typed, "That this isn't settled, and that I need to be useful in a way that's hard to set aside." She put the phone in her pocket and went back to work. The community consultation at the gallery was held on a Tuesday evening. 46 people showed up, which was more than Bennett's office had projected, and significantly more than the one they'd held at the municipal hall the previous month. Cecelia had spent 3 days on the logistics. The configuration of the room, not lecture style, but in grouped clusters with clear sightlines to the presentation wall, was a deliberate choice. The catering was simple and good. The gallery's collection pieces, still in their places on the surrounding walls, provided context that a boardroom couldn't. Bennett presented the project. He was good at it. Grounded, responsive, not defensive, when a resident from the Hastings corridor pushed back on the height variance. He acknowledged the concern and redirected it toward the community benefit plan in a way that didn't feel like deflection. Afterward, when most attendees had filtered out and the catering team was clearing, she found him standing near the east window with a coffee and what appeared to be a significant mental file he was working through. 14 people gave substantive feedback, he said when she came to stand nearby. More than the previous consultation combined. The room helped, she said. The room and the person who organized the room. The room. He looked at her sideways. You gave 3 people specific referrals during the break. 1 to a local arts organization, 1 to a heritage consultant, and 1 to a city councilor's office. They had concerns that connected to people who could actually address them. It seemed efficient. You've done community consultation before. I've done a lot of things that don't appear in my job title, she said. He was quiet for a moment. What did the director say about the East Wing? She turned her head. How do you know about that? I'm the architect on the adjacent project. The development group they're talking to has been looking at 3 parcels on this block. I knew they were in conversation with Hargrove. He paused. I should have said something. Why didn't you? He considered that honestly. Because when I realized you didn't know, you were already here, and I didn't want to be the one to deliver that in the middle of everything else. She looked at him. That was the wrong call. I know, he said. Not defensively, just as a straightforward agreement. If something in your work affects mine, she said, I need to know, not after, not when it's convenient. You're right. I'm sorry. She held that for a moment. Then she looked out at the room. The director says it's exploratory. I have 4 months before any decision crystallizes. I'm using that time for what? To be difficult to remove, she said simply. He almost smiled. She caught it. That's not the vocabulary most people use for it, he said. Most people call it building a case or demonstrating value, she said. It means the same thing. I'd rather say what it is. Do you always say what it is? When I have the choice. She picked up her bag from the chair nearby. Thank you for tonight. The residents responded to you. They responded to having somewhere to come, he said. Good night, Bennett. Good night, Cecelia. She walked out into the February dark and heard the door close behind her, and she stood on the sidewalk for a moment before she started toward the parking structure, aware that she had just had a conversation that she was going to be thinking about in a way that had nothing to do with the consultation. 3 days later, she heard from Sophie, who had a particular gift for gathering information from the ambient air of institutions, that the development group in conversation with the Hargrove board had a name. The name was Pemberton Capital, and Pemberton Capital's primary project on the East Hastings corridor, the hotel expansion that had been discussed for months, was one that Bennett's architecture firm had turned down 6 months ago, citing irreconcilable conflicts with the community impact assessment. She stood in the gallery's back office, reading the name on her phone screen, and understood something with a specific quiet clarity. Bennett already knew which development group was talking to the gallery. He had known before the consultation, and he had told her it was exploratory and that he should have said something, and those 2 things together meant that what he hadn't said was that Pemberton Capital was precisely the kind of development interest that would be worth being concerned about. She put the phone down. She didn't move for about 30 seconds, then she picked it up and called him. He answered on the second ring. "Cecelia, Pemberton Capital," she said, a pause, 2 seconds. "How did you find out?" "It doesn't matter. What matters is that you knew which group it was and you didn't tell me that specifically. I told you it was exploratory. You told me enough to seem forthcoming without telling me the thing that was actually relevant," she said. Her voice was level, not cold, just exactly as clear as the situation called for. "The relevant thing was that the group your firm turned down on community impact grounds is the same group negotiating with my gallery's board." The silence lasted longer this time. "I didn't tell you," he said, "because I didn't want it to seem like I was using a concern about your gallery to discredit a competitor." "That's a fair concern," she said. "It's also not your call to make for me. I can evaluate information and decide what to do with it. But I need to have the information first." "You're right, I know I am," she said. Not unkindly, just factually. "What are you going to do?" he asked. "I'm going to find out what Pemberton's proposal actually involves, not the version the board has been shown. The actual proposal, with the community impact history attached." She paused. "And then I'm going to put it in front of the people who need to see it. That's not simple." "No," she agreed. "Are you going to tell me I shouldn't?" "No," he said. "I'm going to tell you that if there's anything from our assessment that would be useful, the one we prepared when we turned the project down, I can make that available, officially, if you want it on record." She stood still for a moment. "Why?" "Because it's the right thing to do," he said. And because he stopped. "Because what?" "Because you told me months ago that you need to know things that affect your work in time to do something about them. I gave you half of that. I'd like to give you the rest." She was quiet. "Cecelia, send me the assessment," she said. "Official version, please. Dated and signed. I'll have it to you by tomorrow morning." "Thank you," she said. And she meant it, and it wasn't the same kind of thank you she'd said to him on the cleared lot, and she knew it, and she suspected he did too. The assessment arrived at 7:43 in the morning. It was detailed and unambiguous. It outlined 4 specific community impact concerns with Pemberton Capital's East Hastings expansion: heritage site disruption, affordable housing displacement, inadequate local business transition support, and a community consultation process the assessment described as insufficient. She read it twice. She formatted a cover memo. She put it in front of the gallery's facilities manager, the chair of the exhibitions committee, and, through a colleague she'd known since her first year at the gallery who now worked in the director's office, in front of 2 board members who were not Patricia Svensson's closest allies. She did not go around Patricia. She went beside her, which was not the same thing, and she trusted that the distinction was visible to anyone who looked carefully. The board called a special session 2 weeks later. Cecelia was not in the room. She was doing her job, which that particular afternoon involved approving the lighting design for a spring photography exhibition. Sophie texted her at 4:17. "Director just walked past me with Alderman Cho. Both of them looked like they'd been through something." Cecelia replied, "Good. Sophie, is that all you're going to say?" "Cecelia, I have an exhibition to light." The proposal from Pemberton Capital was tabled. The board voted to commission an independent community impact review before proceeding with any East Wing discussions. Patricia Svensson sent Cecelia a 3-sentence email acknowledging that the assessment information had been appropriately flagged through institutional channels. 3 sentences. But the sentences were in writing, which meant something. Sophie read the email over Cecilia's shoulder and said, "She'll never say it out loud, but you just became very difficult to set aside." "Good," Cecelia said. And she closed her laptop and went to look at the photography lighting, because it mattered, and because the work always mattered, and because that was what she had been saying all along. Bennett called that evening, not to ask what happened. He seemed to already know, which meant either Priya had industry contacts or the architectural community in Vancouver was smaller than the square footage suggested. "I heard the proposal was tabled," he said. "It was. How do you feel?" She sat down on the edge of her kitchen table with her coat still on. "Steady," she said. "It was the right outcome. I don't feel triumphant. I feel like it went the way things should go when people have the correct information." "That's a very restrained answer. I'm a restrained person." "I know," he said. "I've been thinking about that." She didn't say anything. "Cecelia." His voice had shifted slightly, not more formal. Less managed, maybe. "I've been thinking about whether there's a version of this where we have a conversation that isn't about a project or an assessment or a community consultation." She looked at her kitchen window. It had started raining, which in Vancouver in March was not remarkable but felt pointed. "What would that conversation be about?" she asked. "I don't entirely know," he said. That's why I'd like to have it." She was quiet for a moment. "That's the most honest thing you've said to me. I've been working up to it." "I know," she said. "I noticed." A brief silence. "There's a place near the market," he said. "Coffee. Not good coffee, but honest coffee. Saturday morning if you're free." She thought of Sophie saying, "It's either a complication or a very good story." "Saturday works," she said. 9 o'clock. 9 o'clock, he confirmed. She hung up and sat for a moment with the phone in her hand and the rain on the window and the specific feeling of a person who has been moving carefully through a complicated space and has just decided, for the first time in a while, to see what it's like to stand still for a minute. The coffee place was exactly as described. Formica counter, wooden stools, a chalkboard menu that had been erased and rewritten so many times the edges of the letters bled into each other. The owner appeared to operate the espresso machine with the focus of someone who considered distraction a personal failing. Bennett was already there. He had not ordered yet, which she noticed and filed under. Paid attention to what she said about working things past the relevant people before committing. They ordered. They sat at a table near the window with the market crowds visible through the glass, bundled and unhurried, Vancouver morning energy. "Your sister," Cecelia said. "The one who calls at inconvenient times. She works in community planning." Bennett looked up from his cup. "Urban policy, City of North Vancouver." "Why?" "Because what she told you about the consultation, asking what the block means to the people who live on it. That's policy language, not just intuition. She knows the process." "She does," he said. "She's been doing it for 9 years. You should formally consult her." "On the East Hastings project." "Not as family, as an expert." He was quiet for a moment. "She'd find that either very professional or very funny." "Probably both," Cecelia said. "Good." He smiled, a real one, not the managed version she'd seen in the consultation room. It changed his whole face in the way she'd been noticing and not commenting on for 2 months. "You've been thinking about my project," she said. "I think about things I encounter," she said. "It's a habit." "You thought about the east entry at the opening." "Twice," she said. "And about the drainage impact on the Heritage Foundation." "That one was professional necessity." "And about the hollow in the Alderton sculpture," he said, "and what the sculptor meant and how space makes people feel correctly located." She looked at him. He looked back. "Yes," she said. "All of those, so did I," he said, "in case you wanted to know." The coffee was not good. It was honest, as promised. Strong and slightly bitter in the way of places that don't try to be something they're not. The rain had stopped. The market outside had the Saturday quality of somewhere people are actually going, rather than somewhere they're passing through. "The Peer Foundation," he said after a while, and she raised an eyebrow. "Sorry, wrong story. I meant the gallery. If the East Wing situation becomes a longer process, which it will, what do you want it to look like when it's resolved?" She considered the question seriously. "A gallery that hasn't lost space it needs. A board that understands community impact isn't a bureaucratic hurdle. And a senior exhibitions coordinator who was part of getting there rather than an obstacle who had to be worked around." "That last one's already true," he said. "It's documented now," she said. "That's different." He held his cup in both hands and looked at her for a long moment. "You're very good at what you do." "I know," she said. "I've had to be." He nodded. Not as acknowledgement, as understanding. There was a difference. The market kept going outside. The owner of the coffee place was taking apart the espresso machine with the same intensity he'd assembled it with. Somewhere in the direction of the inlet, a fairy horn sounded, low and definite, the way things sound when they know exactly where they're going. "I'd like to do this again," he said. "Coffee? Conversation that isn't about a project." She looked at her cup. "We'll see how well you manage it," she said. "Your track record includes withholding relevant information." "Noted," he said. "I'm working on she said. "I've noticed that too." He smiled again. She didn't look away this time. Outside the window, Vancouver went about its Saturday with the unhurried steadiness of a city that has made its peace with the weather. The rain coming or not coming. The mountains visible or hidden in cloud. The inlet always there regardless, and inside the unremarkable coffee place near the market. 2 people sat across from each other in the particular way of people who have said enough to know the conversation is going to continue, and who are not in a hurry, and who have learned, each in their own way, through their own specific set of circumstances, that the most important things are usually built slowly, without shortcuts, without walls where they don't belong, and with enough light to see what's actually there.